Retro Hangover is supported via Patreon by listeners like you. We'd especially like to thank patrons Lyle McCarnes, Ashton Ruby, Randall Quiggle, Tony G, Stud Still Smash the Milkman, Keith Gasper, Raging Demon, Miss Peachy, Mass Keaton, Diskai Mara, Ozzy Garcia, JC, Megan Caruso, Andrew Liguori, Lunchbox, aka the Disgruntled Gamer, Adam from The Good, the Bad, the Backlog, Rick Firestone, Dave Jackson, Jenny E, Retro Overdrive, Soha, Parallax Puddles, The Emperor, Storm Beagle, Matt, aka Stormageddon, B. Ross and Vanfernal from Super Garbage Day, Gary Heather, the Retro Vixen, Eric Guess, Nomad from the Retro Wildlands podcast, Ash Events, Alan Bingham, Mike the Ref from Backbreaker Gaming, Ryan, Player One, Low 5 Alex, Alt, Renner Dreaming, and Oh Me. Your continued engagement and generous donations are deeply appreciated.
Open your ears and crack some beers. You are listening to the most recent episode of Retro Hangover.
Hello, retro and classic gamers. Welcome to the podcast where we dare dream dissident decisions deciding decadent delicacies. This is Retro Hangover. I am your co-host, Chris Copleen, with special guest Vanfernal from Super Garbage Day. And, as always, your host, Shane Orange Dick Spiral Dragon! Salter!
It's like a duck's, Chris.
What are they called it? Like the little corkscrew?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know.
Wine opener?
Sure. I would never want to use it that way, but yeah, that sure is an image. Do you think that someone's made a wine opener that's like a duck, and when you fold it out, it's like the duck's like, you know, bait and tackle is like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
I figure somebody's had to have done that at some point.
Do you know what a duck's penis is called, Van?
You know what? Thinking about it, I never really thought about ducks having penises, but I guess they would, right?
Well, something similar to one.
It's a corkscrew.
Really? Huh.
Oh, it is called I guess it's not called a corkscrew. It looks like a corkscrew.
I mean, wouldn't it just be called a cockscrew? I mean, I feel like that's just sitting there.
Wait.
A cockscrew.
So you remember Street Fighter 3? Dudley, he has this corkscrew blow? That took a very dark meaning real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Well, especially if the other character's bent over.
Huh. I'm so glad I'm here.
Yeah, that's generally how most people feel.
Welcome to the show, Van. I'm glad that the first question or the first greeting we ever threw your way was, what is a duck's penis called? That will go down in the annals of history for all time.
Well, this is the type of trivia question that keeps me up at night,
Well, just, when it wins you pub trivia, just, remember us.
I'm assuming it keeps you awake as well.
It would, really.
Yeah. I am glad you're here too. Finally get to have you over here from the Super Garbage Day, which I'm a fan of. I think I mentioned that show over there in the Hellboy episode, because I think you guys should play that game for your Super Garbage Bowl one year. I'm sure that what's his name? Kenshiro will nominate that game for you. It might be on that list.
Oh my God. I don't know. The RNG gods love that guy, because
yes, they do.
Every Kenshiro game just like pops like right up in the list.
You've gotten some good ones, but apparently Kenshiro has some things in the future. Anyway, Kenshiro is like a decent name, not the best name for this episode. Not really a good segue into what we will be talking about today, which is a Sega Dreamcast, because Segata Shanshiro died so the Sega Dreamcast could live, if you follow your Japanese Dreamcast commercial lore.
Holy shit, that's a deep cut.
Yes.
Those commercials were just great.
And I'm glad that all 5 of you out there that understood it. I'm here for you.
Listen, Chris, all I know is that my Dreamcast is populated by thousands of small little polygonal characters. They all live in there. There's a big like mother brain that's what's happening because it's thinking. It's thinking, Chris.
No, you can't say it like that. You have to say it like it's thinking.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You have to whisper.
I forgot. I have to put that extra, late 90s, early 2000s, like weird edge on everything.
But the reason we're doing it is because it's turning 25 years old. So all month, all September, we're covering Dreamcast games.
Woo!
I think you'll like all of them, unless you don't. But before we get into that, before we get into our thoughts about the Sega Dreamcast and its brief history and all the things that we are wont to do, we are starting off with what we are wont to do as well, which is talking about what games we have been playing lately. And as is tradition, we like to start with our guests. So, Mr. Fernal, what games have you been playing lately?
So, I recently got the Castlevania Dominus collection that came out with, they shadow dropped it during the last Nintendo Direct. And I'm really excited for that one because I haven't really played the DS Castlevania games because I never owned a DS. So I'm catching up with that. And I did try the new version of Haunted Castle, which is Haunted Castle Revisited. And it is a massive improvement over the original. It's really cool.
Yeah, I saw it on your YouTube channel and you beat it. You died only like how many times? 3 times? Very impressive.
I did edit out a couple of deaths at the end, but it was about 5 times. It's not super hard. It's about a half an hour, 40-hour experience. It's very short because it's still an arcade game at heart. It is a lot of fun and definitely better than the arcade one because that game is it's rough.
That game sucks.
Yep.
I think we can all admit that now. All right, how about yourself, Shane?
Man, what have I been doing? I don't know. Let's see. We're in the new season. What are we? 5? Yeah, season 5 of Diablo 4. So I am running my barrage rogue to great success. Having a lot of fun, just spamming arrows all over the screen and blowing shit up. So that's always a good time. I'm actually making really good progress this season. Like I'm actually probably going to be done with all the seasonal stuff like way in advance, which is unusual for me. So that's nice, I guess. But besides that, I actually just today at the time of recording, I checked out a demo for a passion project game that is on Steam. It's like 2 dudes just doing this like in their free time. Like they're not even asking for money for it. They're just like, if you want to donate, that's cool. But we're just doing this because we want to do it. It's called Vane, and it's a sort of like it's like a first-person open-world zombie survival game, which has been already sort of likened to like Project Zomboid, but in like actual full 3D. And so I checked that out today, and so far I'm pretty impressed, especially from just like a 2-man team. It's pretty good. I haven't really gotten enough time to really get into the meat of like the mechanics as far as like, crafting and all that good stuff. But I have been doing what I always do with most of those open world games like Fallout or Oblivion or, Skyrim or whatever. And that is chronically hoarding every single scrap of shit that's not nailed down. So that's always a good time. Yeah, I mean, you never know when you're going to need a broken calculator for something in the zombie apocalypse. I mean, you could salvage it for parts.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so far so good. I'm actually pretty impressed with it. So I want to put some more time into it. I think I might actually do it on stream so we can kind of show it off to some of the folks on Sunday. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for me. I'm about to start jumping into actually a certain Dreamcast game pretty soon because we're going to be talking about it. But I don't know. Should we be cagey about that? We've kind of flip flopped on that over the years, like whether or not we keep these things close to the chest or if we just don't care. So I don't know.
I think it adds hype. I think we just put it out there. It adds hype or disappointment. So
well, there you go.
It's a good game. So we can say it's going to be Soul Calibur.
Oof.
Oh, I mean, that's not what I was talking about, but yeah, sure. That too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, you mean the other one?
Yeah. The needle mouse. What goes fast?
Oh,
The Needle Mouse's Adventure.
That's right.
I got excited for Soul Calibur, and then they mentioned the mouse.
I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about it. And I'm sure our guest will be excited to talk about it too, assuming everything lines up.
Yeah, we'll see.
Because everything's yeah, we'll see. I look forward to you playing that game, Shane.
I played the second one. I actually don't think I've played the first one. Somehow I just skipped right to the second one. Probably because it has Escape from the City, but
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
That shit's banging. I don't care what anybody says. But I don't know. What about you, Chris? What's been keeping you busy?
Life?
I mean, that's fair.
Like all of us. I have carved some time to play some games because what I've been doing in my free time is, I haven't like had a job per se, but I've been getting ready for a job, which is, I mentioned this on the last episode that we recorded, a lot of studying. And I checked my studying information today, and over the past month, I've put 60 hours into studying. And so you have to carve out some time to play a little bit of gaming on occasion, or else you're going to go crazy. So I have played some Saturn games for IO Saturnalia, played some World Series baseball, and shocker, it's a baseball game that plays a lot like 8 and 16-bit baseball games. So yeah, that's going to be a fun episode. And this game called Off-World Interceptor Extreme, it's one of the best average games I've ever played because of the FMV sequences. Give me those cheesy FMV sequences, man. And they put cheese on top of the cheese by doing Mystery Science Theater 3000 blasting of scenes from this game. Because it was originally a 3DO game, then was ported over to the PlayStation. They decided to add the commentary. You can't turn it off. And it's fucking wild, man. Like within the first 2 minutes, there's a character. This game was released in 1995. So keep that in mind with this joke, which is almost too soon. There's this guy that like makes this face and hisses at like one of the military dudes in this cutscene. And the Mystery Science Theater 3000 guy goes, "What, does that dude think he's the Crow?" And the other guy says, "I wish he was the Crow, then he'd be dead already." And I was like, oh,
that is dark.
I was like, oh, wasn't okay.
Can't be any worse than what the Crow remake has done to the movie's legacy. That's for sure.
I mean, that probably killed him again, but you know.
I mean, the thing is that no one's watching it, so it doesn't really matter, or anyone cares about it.
It's going into that same bucket for me of movies that don't exist, like the fourth Indiana Jones, for example, or anything ever after Episode 3 of Star Wars.
Yeah.
You know, on that note, I'm glad that perfect movies like The Matrix never got any sequels.
Right.
So, yeah, never heard of them.
So that is great.
Yeah. Matrix 2 is fine.
Okay.
And there's only, what is it? There are only 2 Alien movies.
Yes, Alien and Aliens. That's what you get.
Those are the only
Although
2.
I've heard was the new one Romulus. I've heard that one's actually pretty good.
I've heard it's okay. Or it's a bit of a mess, but it's a good popcorn flick. Just in terms of fun, I played some Mega Man 8 because why not? Because I wanted to play it, and I've been enjoying it. The levels are a little bit longer than I would like, but I don't know. I just got like, I always get this hankering, this itch to play Mega Man 8 from time to time, because a lot of people say it's not a very good Mega Man game, and it's not. But it is a pretty good game. It's fun. It's still fun.
Also, that voice acting is top notch.
Oh, chef's kiss.
You know,
chef's kiss.
Dr. Wowie.
Dr. Wowie. I've had a couple beers.
No, and I love how Mega Man calls Bass like the fish. Like, they didn't even try.
Bass, we are not enemies. So good.
Yikes.
All right, but this has been going on too long. I love this. I think we're ready to do some brief historying, aren't we, Shane?
Yeah, I was about to say, speaking of too long, boy, do we have a doozy for you today. Chris, would you like to give to the people, perhaps one might say foist upon them, this not so brief history? I would say perhaps a thorough and extensive history of the Sega Dreamcast.
It's thinking. $99.99. If you're listening to the show and live in North America, there's no doubt in my mind what that date brings to mind in terms of gaming. While we all may have differing opinions, there's no denial that Final Fantasy VIII was a release with a major impact on the gaming industry. Being a follow-up to the biggest release for the original PlayStation, there's no denying that... Oh, right. As I was saying, that date was when Sega made their last charge into the fray that was home console hardware development with the Dreamcast. It was a brief spark of hope for the Sega fans that remained. A flame that many would hope would burn bright and bring back the brand many had fallen in love with in the early 90s to its former glory. And while those that jumped on board had many reasons to believe that something like that could happen, that flame was quenched seemingly as quickly as it was set alight. But, as we are wont to do, we are here to explain the brief history, not wax poetic, about what could have been. We'll do the poetic waxing later. Things were not looking great for Sega in the 5th generation. While the Saturn had its loyal fan base, especially in Japan, and, of course, yours truly, listened as IO Saturnalia on Patreon. Sega had decided to discontinue the console sometime in 1998 with, aside from the games, a bit of a whimper. It was a commercial flop in the West, and Sega knew they had to make some shifts in strategy. 1, to easily access the market, and 2, to save costs as they were not exactly in the most desirable economic conditions. This was most evident with the resignation of Sega's then president, Hayao Nakayama, who was replaced by Sega of America's Soichiro Iramajiri. Sega of America would then have Bernie Stolar become Sega of America's new CEO, who had infamously said, "The Saturn is not our future," in an interview with Electronic Gaming Monthly in their September 1997 interview. Things needed to turn around. The Dreamcast development began in 1997. Iramajiri, instead of using a GPU that Sega had been working on since 1995 with Lockheed Martin, the 3DO company, Matsushita, and Alliance Semiconductor, had decided to tap a team from IBM to work in secret to make another GPU in the United States and give it the codename Black Belt. At the same time, another, separate, but internal team also began working on a new GPU, led by Sega's future CEO, Hideki Sato. This team would codename their project White Belt, out of spite for not having been the team tapped by Iramajiri, before naming their project in honor of the final boss of Virtua Fighter, Dural. Black Belt would use a 3DFX Voodoo 2 and Voodoo Banshee GPUs with a Motorola PowerPC 603E CPU, and Dural would use a Hitachi SH4 processor architecture alongside a VideoLogic Power VR2 GPU, which was made by NEC. In the end, Sega decided to go with Dural. It was rumored that the decision was influenced by the architecture being manufactured by the Japanese NEC, a company that Sega had a professional relationship with, but it was also said that the choice was made because it was the only processor that could provide the required 3D geometry required while also being off the shelf and at low cost. This decision drew the ire of some American developers, notably Electronic Arts, and was also questioned by Sega of America's Stolar. With the decision made, Sega continued to find ways to correct previous mistakes while also changing the codename from Dural to Katana. While maintaining low cost,
Sega would try and make their console more approachable from a development standpoint. Instead of making the Dreamcast more like a console, they would make it more like a PC, going so far to tell the developers if a game could be developed for a Pentium 2 200, it could work on their upcoming system. They also decided to include a modem with every console, seeing the rise in internet adaptation, and also decided to make the modem modular as the technology and data delivery was experiencing its own rapid achievement. Other technological considerations Sega would make would be a new media format with Yamaha in the GD-ROM. This was slightly larger than your typical CD, but at a very similar price. This would avoid the cost of adapting to the relatively new DVD format. Memory storage, called a virtual memory unit or VMU, would display images or statuses of the current game being played on your controller, and could also be used to play mini-games for bonuses while on the go. Sega would also get Microsoft to create a custom version of Windows CE for the console with DirectX API, increasing the ease of creating PC ports. However, most developers would prefer Sega's own development tools as it allowed greater performance. On May 21st, 1998, Sega revealed their Project Katana to the public, but with its new name, a portmanteau of Dream and Broadcast, the Dreamcast, rumored to have been penned by D and Enemy Zero creator Kenji Eno. Eno was also rumored to have designed the console's logo, an orange spiral, or blue for our pals. And just to go back on how bad off Sega was at the time, Sega initially considered removing their branding from the console entirely. Obviously, that didn't happen, but that's where they were at. On November 27th, 1998, Sega released the Dreamcast in Japan. However, they experienced major issues in getting it on the shelves, as there was a shortage of PowerVR chips due to a high failure rate in this manufacturing. It was so bad that they had to stop pre-orders themselves. Despite that, the system sold out of stock on its first day, but only had one launch game sell well, Virtua Fighter 3. Games you would think would be there at launch, Sonic Adventure and Sega Rally Championship 2, ended up being delayed. As a result, the Dreamcast's hot launch ended up going cold. It wasn't until July that it would get a hit in Japan with Seaman. As another move to get consoles off the shelves prior to its North American release, Sega did a price reduction from approximately $290 to $190. This was conjoined by another game, Soul Calibur, being released that caused a spark of momentum. Meanwhile, in North America, Sega Stoller was doing everything he could to repair the relationships that had been irrevocably damaged by the stealth release of the Saturn in 1995, so they could stock the shelves appropriately. They also made inroads with Midway Games to provide more games for their launch, of which there would be 18, a marked improvement from the Saturn's 6. Sega would go all in with its marketing blitz, using the campaign theme of "It's thinking," see I whispered, to indicate how powerful this system was. Then, September 9th, 1999, at the price of $199, Sega released the Dreamcast in North America. Here, it would exceed expectations by setting sales records. Within 24 hours, it would sell a total of 225,132 units, and by November 4th, had surpassed 1 million units in sales. Europe didn't see quite the same love, much like Japan, but it was far more pronounced. There it would release on October 14th, but it would take over 2 months to hit the 500,000 unit mark. This trend would continue, as it wouldn't hit 1 million units sold until almost a full year after launch. But even with momentum starting hot in North America and some traction developing in Japan, it just wasn't enough for Sega to hold on. Sony's PlayStation 2 was starting to drive its hype machine, which would be the successor to what was, at the time, the best-selling home console ever released. Additionally, the PlayStation 2 was going to be more powerful and, perhaps most importantly, also be a DVD player. And one of both the cheapest and best of those on the market. Sega would try a variety of approaches to stay afloat. That would include price reductions, establishing their own ISP with heavy rebate incentives, and aggressive advertising to the US market. But the looming arrival of the Colossus that would be the PlayStation 2 was too much for the Dreamcast to overcome. Once again, Sega was in dire straits. It was so dire that in holiday 2000, the remodeled version of the PlayStation saw itself as the best-selling home console of that time period. On January 31st, 2001, Sega announced the discontinuation of the Dreamcast after March 31st, along with fire sale clearance pricing. They would also be exiting the hardware business for good, shifting solely to third-party development. But they almost weren't able to do even that. So deep in debt, Sega was almost on the brink of not even existing. However, on March 16th, 2001, Sega's chairman, Isao Okawa, who had longed for Sega to get out of the hardware market, died. In his death, he forgave the $500 million in debt that Sega had owed him and returned the $695 million in stock back to Sega. This is pretty much the only reason Sega is even still around at all today. By the end of its life, the Dreamcast would sell in total approximately 9.13 million units and have over 600 games. Hardcore fans of the system and its games would never truly go away though. Many of the system's biggest hits would see release on its previous competitors' hardware, including longtime rival Nintendo's. There would also be ports of Dreamcast games released on future consoles up until the current generation at the time of this recording. Additionally, it spawned a homebrew market that continues to make games for the console to this day. While in the end, it was snuffed out in the face of much stronger competition and a comedy of errors that preceded it, the Dreamcast still managed to carve out a legacy of love and admiration from many in the gaming community. And that is your brief history of the Sega Dreamcast.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for that
My mouth is
thorough history. I don't even know where to begin with that. I did not know a lot of the background of this, but that is fucking wild. Just like all of the crazy shit that ended up happening. Or the fact that like I was not even aware that the only reason Sega is even a thing anymore was because one dude was just like, yeah, you just take all the money back when I die.
pretty much.
That's wild.
The sad part about that brief history right now is it was about as long as the lifetime of the Dreamcast itself.
We brought it to you in real time.
It's not inaccurate. I mean, it was dead. It was like officially dead before the Xbox or GameCube even came out. Like it was done.
Was it?
March 2001, March 31st, 2001. GameCube came out like that later that year, at least in North America.
Okay.
I can't speak to the Japanese release.
Yeah, the thing is, that thing did not survive the launch of the PS2. Like the writing was on the wall already.
Dude, like the PS2 is like what, a $400 DVD player? $300 DVD player, something like that.
At the moment, they were like what, $600 the average like DVD player.
Yeah, $600, $700, $800, and like the PS2 was half the price, and it was a better DVD player than all of them. There's like no way Sega was going to beat that. That would have been impossible.
I say I still occasionally play DVDs in my PS2 Slim to this day.
You're going to burn out the laser, but that's a different conversation entirely.
I do what I want, Chris.
I know. It's not hard to there's repair places.
There are.
But
That's true.
yeah, what blew me away, and I always heard the code names Black Belt, Dural, Katana, all those things like that back in the day. Like, what a mess. How does that happen? How do you have like 3 GPUs for your next? I mean, R&D, I get it, right? You got to have different prototypes and things you got to work through. But like, you're talking about like corporate backstabbing to the extreme.
You know what this just made me think of? I think the Sega Dreamcast is the Duke Nukem Forever of consoles.
It launched within a timely period. I mean, they didn't work on it for like 10 years.
No, I'm just saying, like, in so far as, you know, Duke Nukem Forever went through so many like engine changes and complete scraps and rewrites and things like that, that it makes me kind of think of that.
Obviously, I'm asking you this as a programmer, Shane. Do you know anything about Voodoo?
I mean, that was before my time as someone who would be old enough to have cared about that. So no, not really.
Okay.
I mean, it originated somewhere in Haiti, I think, and it has creepy dolls.
It's accepted as the source of most zombie mythology as we know it today.
Yeah. You know, if Sega used the voodoo chip and they could take all those little people that are inside your Dreamcast right now and give them needles and copies of PS2s.
And
I think
there you go.
That's how it could have won.
Actually, I think it all makes sense now because they used that voodoo to stab each other between Sega of America and Japan, and
that too. Oh God, that relationship.
No, that they had a very adversarial like relationship since the Saturn days, and when you have two teams for the same company just working secretly, that was a recipe for disaster.
I mean, it turned out better than it should have. To be honest,
it killed a guy and like made his fortune save the company. I don't think that went very well.
I don't think it directly killed him. There probably is more complications here.
I think the Dreamcast killed the guy.
It sucked so much. He was like, I'm just going to off myself to make sure Sega doesn't die too.
Sega might want to lay low for a little bit there.
He's not actually dead.
He like forgave 500 million and I don't know, man. That sounds like a hit.
That's almost $1.2 billion. That just fortunately just showed up in Sega's returns right when they said that we're no longer going to be making the system that is just draining us of all our cash.
It's just
you never know.
It's just crazy to me because like looking over this history, right, of like everything that went into eventually making this console, it's like they were trying to like just throw darts at a board and see what ideas they were going to go with without actually asking anyone. Like it is fucking actual banana pants that they went to Microsoft and was like, yo, can you make a version of Windows CE specifically for us? Because we think that we're going to want to port these games to PC. And like the majority of developers were just like, no, fuck that. We're just going to work with the Sega's dev tools. Like there was no like market research. There was no focus group of like, hey, like, hello, prominent developers. Would you want to do this? Is this a thing that we should spend time and effort and money on? Like there's just so many, like, it's so wasteful. Like the number of like dead end threads that went into like making this console is just baffling.
Yeah, it feels like everyone saw like the Sega was failing and everyone at the same time independently they were, I know how to save this company. And they just went with it at the same time.
Oh, man.
It can only be me. It's only me. I have to do it. Well, now we get Yakuza games, so at least we have that. And Sonic is still around.
Sure. Wow.
I mean,
yeah, man. It's great.
The longevity of that blue like rodent, it still baffles me to this day.
Just
I'm just gonna read.
I'm
off,
sorry. It's just no. Sorry. It's just the fucking like hubris that went into a lot of these decisions. Like where Sega at the time, I'm assuming they still thought that they were like hot shit. So they were just like, what if we fucking work with Yamaha and make our own fucking like media format? What if we make a GD-ROM? It'll be like a CD, but like a little bit bigger. Not like a laser disc. That's too big, but like a little bit bigger because we don't want to deal with whatever this DVD thing is. Like, oh my God. Like who was it's like a book that was written and you read it and you're like, this really could have used an editor. Like that's the feeling that I'm getting from this process.
Yeah.
Well, I think the GD-ROM made sense at the time because if you remember, I think Sony owned the rights to the DVD. Or they had some shared rights. It was either them or Panasonic or Philips, one of the three of them.
I think it was shared. I think all of them had some say in it. But was the actual laser on the Dreamcast just a regular CD? That there was
yes.
So the GD-ROM could be read by a CD-ROM.
Yes.
Yeah, that will save cost a lot in development since you didn't need an actual DVD to run DVDs.
I think it can. I have not tried to put a Dreamcast game in a CD player in a very long time, so I'm not sure. It might be.
Yeah, well, I do remember like you could copy GD-ROMs into a CD and run them fairly easily too.
Well, yeah, because you would compress them. So I mean, one of the additional thought processes behind this is because proprietary media was a big thing back then. I mean, just look at the GameCube that came out a year later with like the mini DVDs that had limited storage space, but it was, hey, it's proprietary, so no one's going to pirate our stuff, which for the GameCube actually worked pretty well. For the Dreamcast, not so much.
Yeah, the folder of burned CDs that I have downstairs is a testament to that.
Because not all games were 1,000 megabytes, which is what a GD-ROM could take.
I think that's what you get when you tell Microsoft, hey, can you make us an operating system? Sure, there's not going to be any piracy if you let that happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. When you make things too over the shelf, when you make things too common, then people are going to figure it out. CD burners were becoming popular at this time if they weren't already. I mean, they were starting to be on your very easily accessible consumer PCs at this time. And so when you have a PC, a tower PC, and you have GD-ROMs, yeah, it's going to take a little while to crack. But if that's all the Dreamcast has is a CD burner and you can just compress it a little bit, and it's essentially a PC, it's not going to be that hard to figure out and trick. Now, if you do have a compressed CD, like its compressed image, if the game is larger than 700 megabytes, then your Dreamcast is going to chug and is going to do some damage to your Dreamcast if you try playing one of those games. But a lot of games are not bigger than that, so it doesn't really do all that much damage to your hardware.
Mm-hmm.
It made sense at the time, especially if you're trying to cut costs, if you're trying to save money, to go. And I guess the GD-ROM cost a similar price to the CD, which was extremely cheap and was larger in terms of memory. But I don't think they could have afforded the DVD. Especially the drive, they couldn't afford it. They could not have afforded the drive at that time. There's no way. But do you want to go into system specs really quick? Because some sickos care about that. I'm just going to read those off and then we can go into our personal experiences, like when we first got into it. So system specs, as we had mentioned some of these in the brief history, it was powered by the Hitachi SH4 32-bit RISC at 200 megahertz. It had an 8 kilobyte instruction cache and an 16 kilobyte data cache. It has a 128-bit graphics-oriented floating point unit at 1.4 gigaflops. I think that's what G-flops means. And it has an NEC Power VR2 rendering engine at 100 megahertz that could process 3 million polygons per second with deferred shading, capable of 16.77 million simultaneous colors with interlaced or progressive scan video at 640 by 480 resolution, with a 67 megahertz Yamaha AICA sound processor and a 32-bit ARM7 RISC CPU. Has 16 megabytes of main RAM with an additional 8 megabytes of RAM for graphic textures and 2 megabytes of RAM for sound. With its media, as we mentioned, a 12x speed GD-ROM drive. So that's the specs.
Man, just like looking at those specs, it's just crazy to me how much can be done with like 8 megabytes of like video RAM.
We got to the moon with like 256 kilobytes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what a camera like on a studio is?
That's megapixels.
Yeah, that's different. Yeah.
It's just, I mean, to be fair, your camera is more powerful than a Dreamcast nowadays because your camera's your phone.
No, keep in mind this is 1.4 gigaflops. The PS5 is 10 teraflops.
Yeah.
So
we've come a little way. We've moved forward a little bit, maybe.
I don't know, man. I want my flops to be penta or nothing where we're going.
We'll get there. Especially with the ray tracing lighting. Gotta get the lighting.
Yes, the lighting is the next graphics frontier.
Yes. But while we're with you, Shane, we're going to head over to personal experiences.
Oh, good.
And I got to ask you, what is your personal experience with the Sega Dreamcast?
You know what? Though I don't have much, admittedly, I feel like my personal experience is at least mildly interesting. So I've got that going for me. So
okay,
I did not own one. I didn't know anybody who had one. I'm pretty sure I never even laid eyes on an actual physical Dreamcast for most of my life. But at this point, let's see, at the time of this recording, we were in the year 2024. So it would have been, close to almost 10 years ago now, where I was working at an after school STEM program for kids. It was pretty fun, for the record. And one of my coworkers, one of my fellow instructors, we were kind of hanging out at home base one afternoon in between our class sessions, and we were just kind of chit-chatting about like retro games and whatever. And he brought up the fact that his family had a Dreamcast with, 2 controllers and just a folder of games that has been sitting in a cabinet, like in his living room for years. And he was like, yeah, it's just taking up space. Like, I think I'm just going to get rid of it. I'm like toss it or something. I don't know. And I was like, okay, well, does it work? He's like, yeah, it works. Like, and you got like a bunch of games for it. I'm like, yeah. Like, do you want to sell it? It's like, sure, I guess. So that's how I ended up getting a Dreamcast for like $40. And I still have it. It is sitting downstairs right now with all of my other retro consoles that I have hooked up to the CRT over there. That's my personal experience. I bought it off a dude for $40, and I've got a folder of a bunch of definitely illegal burned Dreamcast games. That's it.
Watch out, Sega's gonna call the cops on you for all your burned.
Yeah, whatever.
Dreamcast games.
Come at me. You can find me.
So hard. Usually I let the guests go last, so I'm going to let you go last here because usually they have the best stories. And I'm going to...
Oh, sure.
Why are you shaking your head? Give yourself some credit.
He's like, that is a mistake.
No, go ahead. I'm a patient man.
Now I got to figure that maybe you're going to have like this like really boring story, and I'm going to be like, oh, crap.
No, go ahead. It's so cool.
Okay. All right. I'm going to be saying this on, I think, in an upcoming project quite a bit. So prepare to hear this story a few times in the future from me, especially on this show. Well, not this show, but I'm digressing. I'm getting too off the rails. This was the first console that I saved up for by mowing the lawn and doing some like other odd jobs for other people and stuff like that I saved up for and bought myself. I think I had some help with the games. I don't exactly remember what games I got at launch. I know Sonic Adventure. I'm unsure of Soul Calibur now that I really think about it. I may have gotten that for Christmas after the massive hype that it got after the launch of the Dreamcast, but I got it and Sonic Adventure on launch day. I probably got Final Fantasy VIII too, knowing how much of a nerd I am. And just, I don't know how I got all this shit. I really don't. There's a lot of games that came out during that time. But yeah, I got it at launch and I was super hyped for it. I was excited for it. This was right around the time that I had gotten heavy into the Saturn import scene. My love for Sega had been reignited because of what was going on with the Saturn and everything around it, and just finding games for it and just discovering how much of a like unloved and underappreciated gem of a system that was. So when I saw that the Sega Dreamcast was coming out and it was at $199, which is cheap for a console, and I think if you adjust for inflation in 2024, when we were recording this, that's still less than $400 today, like $370, which is less than a mainstream console on today's market. It's still like a discount price. And just, I remember how bright and vivid the graphics were, and it felt like a huge leap over the N64 and PlayStation. And it was a huge leap. It is. Go take a look at it. And now there are a lot of ports there, and a lot of them are just higher resolution textures. And yeah, I mean, they still look a lot better, but that's the case. But there are games that were released on day one that just, you could tell were another generation up, especially when it came to games like, NFL 2K and Soul Calibur and even Sonic Adventure. Like, there's no way you could have done Sonic Adventure on either the PS1 or the N64 or the Saturn. Like that would not have happened. So seeing this graphical leap really incentivized me to get into it. And I loved my Dreamcast. I remember defending it to all my friends online very angrily and saying how great it was and the PS2 would burn in hell and fuck Sony and I don't want anything to do with it because Sega needs to survive and we all need to support Sega. We all know how well that turned out. I actually like was so into some of these games for the Sega Dreamcast and it was my first like taste of online. Well, that's not true because I played Warcraft and StarCraft online, but like in terms of consoles, like I think for a lot of people is my first taste of playing anything online. And I got this game called Phantasy Star Online. Phenomenal game. I think like I don't know why I had to do this, but I had to buy another Dreamcast because of something that was going on with Phantasy Star Online, or I thought I did, instead of just getting a game. But I think this was during the fire sale when you got like the Dreamcast and a year worth of internet with it for like $60 or something like that.
Wait.
But there was a copy.
Wait, I'm sorry. Did you buy a whole ass console for like internet access?
No.
Okay.
The Dreamcast started having problems reading certain games, but it could only be tied to like the controller, the VMU or something. There's some weird circumstance that like the only way to really remedy it is you've got a new Dreamcast, which I don't recall why. I could have been even as dumb as it came with the Sega Smash Pack Volume 1, which is terrible, but they weren't selling that on the consumer stores, consumer shelves. That may have been it. It was dumb. It was a really dumb reason. That's all I remember. But also, like, I was having problems playing King of Fighters 99 Dream Match, which I was getting really into fighting games because the Dreamcast was chock full of them. And so I stuck with it until the bitter end, like right up until the bitter end when like nothing was coming out anymore. I got my Bleemcast games, all this stuff like that. So like flash forward a long time later, I think this was back in 2014 when I started collecting retro games again. And I already gotten my Master System. And instead of going to the Genesis next, I elected to go to the Dreamcast next. I don't know what triggered that. But just to give an idea to people how much different the retro gaming market was back in 2013, 2014, 2015, I was able to go on eBay and get myself 2 Dreamcasts and 20 games with, I think, 2 or 3 controllers for $60 with free shipping. And I got a Dreamcast again. And at that time, my son was getting into retro gaming. So he was most because my influence, of course, but like he had been playing the Saturn. He had gotten to Fighting Vipers, but all of a sudden like, hey, I got a new Dreamcast. You want to try it out? And he started playing Sonic Adventure and he loved it. Like he would play Sonic Adventure all the time. And I ended up getting some of the games that I was in love with back in the day, like Skies of Arcadia, and just played the hell out of them. Beat it to completion for like the first time in forever. And yeah, like the Sega Dreamcast is just one of those consoles that is just like really a special console to me. It's really important. I love it. It really invigorated my love for fighting games at the time. I don't think I played many fighting games after that, if any. I think that was the last console I played fighting games for, like as a main system for doing so. Even the controller was terrible. My thumbs got all tore up and destroyed. I like the PlayStation 2, but the PlayStation 2 isn't special to me. I have no love for the Xbox, and the GameCube's just cute. But at the end of the day, it's just like I look at the Dreamcast, and it's just like, ah, I miss you. But that's my personal experience with it. Is just a year of just really, really liking it. Maybe not playing it as much as I should, but it's one of those consoles, man. That's an integral part of my gaming history. How about yourself, Dan?
Same. No, but it does mirror a lot of what you said. I was around 17 when this came out, and this was the first console I actually saved for. I pre-ordered it at, it might have been Babbage's, Babbage's, GameStop, eBay. I think it was eBay. They were all pretty much the same. But the reason I got this, the main reason was I was huge into fighting games ever since Street Fighter 2. Like every pizzeria you will get, you will have Street Fighter and all that. And I played fighting games religiously with my brother. And the thing is, up to that point, there was always a gap between the arcades and the consoles no matter how close they got. For example, the Tekken ports for the PlayStation 1, they were very similar to the arcade, but not quite there. But Soul Calibur, when I saw it in magazines and everything in Dreamcast, this was actually a massive leap from the arcade version, and I just had to have it. So that was the main reason I was hyped for the system, and I did get it with Soul Calibur and the blue mouse thing too. I do actually remember I enjoyed that game because Sonic was a spectacle when it came out. It was very over the top and everything, but Soul Calibur, when it came out, I think there was not a game that looked better than that, period, at the moment. In even on PC, back when you had your 3D accelerators, it was just on a league of its own, and it was just so impressive. After that, it was just, if you were a fighting game fan, the Dreamcast was the system. It finally got the ports of Street Fighter 3, which no contemporary console to that arcade could actually play it. You had Marvel vs. Capcom, the Capcom vs. SNK games, and then the actual exclusives at the moment. I was a huge Resident Evil fan too. Code Veronica was a big game at the time. And I just love everything about this console. And Shenmue, since it was announced for the Saturn back in the day, that's a game I was very hyped for. So that was pretty much what made me hold on to that console as long as I could.
I am shocked to hear that you love Shenmue.
I was hyped for it.
Oh, I was too. I was too. And then I played it.
People love forklifts, Chris.
But here's the thing. I think Shenmue walked so a lot of the modern open world games could run. It had a lot of ideas. They were not fleshed out the best way possible, but honestly, I still think Shenmue has a charm. It tried something so different that I can still get engrossed like in the world and all that. It did something different. It clearly wasn't for everyone, but I appreciate what they were trying to do. But I did get Shenmue again on the remastered version that came out for PS4, I think. And oh boy, it had a trend that I have found with a lot of Dreamcast games that they have not aged very well. And that happened with a lot of them, especially Code Veronica is also a game I played on my stream. I was like, oh my God, this game will never end. But overall, the Dreamcast, I loved it at the time. And it just the fact that system died so quickly, it's a you had to be there kind of experience. And that's part of the reason I cherish it so much. That system did not have a chance to age at all. It was there, then it wasn't.
Yeah, I guess that goes into the next topic I kind of put down here that we can discuss, and that is like what's its place in history? Because I think that we're getting further and further away from it. As I've mentioned before, at the time of recording, then the reason it's coming out when it is to celebrate its 25th anniversary. I mean, this is a console that lasted, like, if you include the Japanese release, about a little over 2 years total on the market. But still, in terms of the retro gaming community zeitgeist, it still holds this monumental kind of reputation. Like it was this fantastically successful system. It didn't even sell worldwide as many units as the Saturn did. So, I mean, that's not true. It was not a massively successful system. I mean, you could argue it's more successful than the Wii U. I think like the Wii U sold 13 billion units when it was far more mainstream. So, different story for a different time. But what do you think? I'll keep it with you, Van. Like in terms of the Dreamcast place in history, like where does it fit in? And why do you think it holds this place in history when arguably like the other consoles were more powerful, more popular, and probably had the more prolific games?
I think part of what makes the Dreamcast so special is that if you think about it, it is the last bastion of the 90s. the 90s died with the Dreamcast pretty much. That a lot of those games were ports from arcade games from 98 and stuff. So a lot of the stuff you were playing on the Dreamcast were pretty much the last games released in the 90s. Crazy Taxi and all that. That was very a snapshot of the time the game came out. And I think because of that, in my case, I was 17, 18 when that came out. I was on my way off to college and everything. So it was a mix of the 90s. It was the last time I lived pretty much at home with my parents in my old room, that kind of thing. So it's just this nostalgia bump of a time that after the Dreamcast, I was already in college. I had the PS2, which lasted a long time. And I feel that I made a transition from basically being a teenager at home to an adult with the life and death of that system. So at least in my experience, the place is that it's just such a mix of emotions in terms of my personal life and what the gaming industry was becoming at the time. So it's kind of weird. It just hits that nostalgia bone in a very specific way for me.
How about yourself, Shane?
Man, it had some cool commercials. No, I mean, honestly, like the thing is, I have zero nostalgia for this thing, you know? Like I remember seeing the ad campaign for the whole like it's thinking thing.
It's thinking.
Yeah, so like I remember that. So I guess that made an impression, right? Because I mean, for what it's worth, I thought the ad campaign was actually pretty good. It's got to be good if it's stuck in our heads for this long. But I mean, outside of that, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't think I'm the right person to ask about what place this has in history, because to me, it's very reductive, I know, but subjectively, it's kind of like a footnote or like a last dying gasp of a giant, right? Because like Sega was just like, oh God, we gotta do something. We gotta make this work. And then it kind of failed miserably. I mean, the fact that it got like a shot of popularity because of Seaman, which holy shit, we need to do an episode on Seaman at some point. But
I'm for it. Let's do it.
Game is insane. But anyway, I mean, actually,
Leonard Nimoy.
Yes, exactly. That's just one facet of the intricate tapestry that is Seaman. But I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, actually, Dreamcast, I mean, I guess with 600 games, I guess there's like a pretty high likelihood there's going to be some oddities, but they had like that. And what was the other one? Oh, Choaniki, right?
I don't know if it had Choaniki. I mean, it probably did.
I thought it did.
Saturn did. I mean, there's a likelihood that it did, but it'd be a Japanese exclusive. There's no way that would have come out in the United States. No.
Oh, no, definitely not. Anyway, yeah, I don't know, man. That's kind of my take on it. It kind of was like this weird, like not with a bang, but a whimper kind of thing for Sega, which in a way is kind of a bummer. But given what we know about how that process went, I kind of find it difficult to feel bad for them, I guess.
I feel you, because if like you weren't caught up in it, like why would you care, right? And I think a lot of retro gamers, for whatever reason, were caught up in it. But go back to Van's point, like it's kind of like the last bastion of the 90s. It was kind of the last console that really tried to be the console of arcade ports, which you didn't get very often at that time. Like we were moving away from the arcades. The arcades were dead anyway.
Right.
But like you just like look at launch, and you have a bunch of games that, well, not a bunch of games, because again, dead. But there were some games that were arcade ports, like Power Stone, that a lot of people loved. It was a great arcade port. Soul Calibur was better than the arcade port and one of the best looking games of the time. The House of the Dead 2 was like almost 1-to-1. The only unfortunate part is that Sega never made their own light gun for the system, but you had third parties that were good. At least in the United States, they didn't make their own light gun. And NFL Blitz 2000 came out for the Dreamcast as well that year. So you had some popular arcade ports, and that was kind of the last time that you would really see that in any form of hype, which was very late 90s, as Van said. But then you get into the other things, like it had a modem. It was that's a big thing, I think, in its place in history. Is the first home console major home console that's stock out of the box came with a modem. I think it was 56.6K here in the United States when it launched, with a broadband adapter, which is, I think, extremely expensive to try and get today. But that allowed a lot of people to play online games. That's how I started playing online games on consoles. With the first game I ever played online for a console was Choo Choo Rocket, and then Phantasy Star Online, and there's a game called Alien Front Online. And so if you know me by my online handle, Zodiac, with an X, XODYAK, that name was created for Alien Front Online. That was my handle back in the day when I would go around and play that. And I think that was also an arcade game, very obscure, but like it had a microphone, the microphone that we'd use for Seaman, you could use for live chat, something Nintendo still can't comprehend in current day.
There's an app on your phone.
But you could do in live chat with your controller online to other people you were playing. Like, that's mind blowing to me that on consoles we were doing this in 1999, and PC gamers are laughing, I'm sure. But that's where a lot of this is it still provided the arcade experience for a generation of gamers that was raised on the arcades. So if you were a huge arcade gamer, yeah, that's kind of its place in history, where it was the last console that really tried to bring the arcade experience home in a time that people just didn't want it anymore. Or the vast majority of people just had moved on, because that was Sega's bread and butter. That was their entire business model, was being arcade developers. That's how they started. That's how they got the rise to success, even in Japan. And so the other thing is, until the Wii, it was really the last console to do weird peripherals, because you had the Seaman microphone, you had Samba de Amigo, you had the maracas set up, which I did have. That was insanely fun. And there's all sorts of other things that the Dreamcast was doing at the time that you didn't really see on the GameCube until like Odama. You definitely, I don't remember seeing with the PS2 until you got iToy much later. Xbox really didn't do nothing fun. So until the Wii, that like you didn't have peripherals. It wasn't doing anything weird or outside the box up until like you got into the Wii era necessarily. Even though you had games that were doing weird things, you didn't really have all the weird peripherals and everything attached to it. That was really a Dreamcast thing. That's kind of where I think it stands in history for me. Van, you got something you were going to say on that?
I just find it very interesting that I feel that Dreamcast is a very you have to be there kind of console, because we're like,
no, it is.
We're like, it was like great, and Shane's like, it's a console. That's basically all his input on it. So it's kind of a shame, because it was very overlooked, and a lot of people, you know, it didn't, 9 million units worldwide, pretty much. Is that what we said? And the PS1 was 100 million, maybe
108.
Yeah. So definitely it was you can say it definitely was a footnote in gaming history, but for us that were still clinging to our 90s and late 80s like arcade roots, it was made for us, you know.
You know what wasn't made for us though? That controller.
The control. Don't get me started on people like, oh,
I am getting you started.
It was cool. It had a VMU. Yeah, you also went back 2 generations with that stupid controller. Why will you take away buttons? That's like you didn't have a dual analog. You didn't have a double shoulder button. So I remember I was playing a game called Macken by the people who made the Shin Megami Tensei series, Atlas. Yeah, and it was a first-person shooter where you can't even control the camera at that point. It was just, no, the controller sucked, and I will die in that hill, and people are just like, no, it was awesome, we have VMU. No, let's just say they put the cord on the bottom of the controller.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because the VMUs go at the top.
Yeah, you gotta have your Tamagotchi attached to your controller, Van, obviously.
And then it had a little notch in the back so you could fold the controller and kind of like jam it in there. Bruh, no, that's
ergonomics.
And like the white knighting fanboying I have seen, as you said, like for the Dreamcast controllers, like what is wrong with you? So first of all, the D-pad should come with an advisory warning for anyone who wants to play 2D fighting games, which the Dreamcast was rich in, by the way. Very rich in 2D fighting games. Good luck playing them without having a lifetime supply of Band-Aids and severe amounts of scar tissue, because I think the scar tissue that is on my thumb is courtesy of the Dreamcast and its D-pad, because I learned to play it and it wasn't pretty.
No,
it was not pretty. It's terrible.
I had to actually buy 2 arcade sticks, like for my brother and I, to be able to play a fighting game in that thing, because it just wasn't working. Like if you were going to taunt in like Street Fighter and stuff, you actually had to hold the start button and press like the X button at the same time. It's ridiculous.
I mean, SNK games work well on that because, Neo Geo only has like 4 buttons. So, I mean, that did work for them. But, I mean, you're right. I mean, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, phenomenal game, had to restructure its entire control scheme. They said for accessibility, but when you look at it, that's kind of like just to port it over to the Dreamcast and how that controller would work, because they remove buttons. How Sega goes. One more thing just about the controller and what I've seen people like really compliment it for and say that Sega was so ahead of their time. And they were in a lot of regards, in a lot of thought processes. But like, they're like, oh, look at the analog joystick. It was Hall effect. Doesn't it make it great? No, that thing is slippery as hell. That thing is like, it's horrible. And this is coming from someone who likes convex analog sticks. Oh, no, I don't. I like concave. What am I talking about? I like concave analog sticks. And this is a convex thing with like little, just like pimples on it or whatever.
Yeah, it was studded for her pleasure.
Yeah. No one's pleasure. No one's getting pleasure from that. It's not good. It's not good. At least the R&L buttons were analog, which is awesome. The only time you saw that prior to it was the Saturn controller. And that gets me to my next point. How do you fuck that up? Like, how do you fuck that up?
And the thing, they had
the controller's the same.
Yeah,
and it's better.
The controller that came with Knights, right? The analog.
Yeah.
It had 6 face buttons, and then it had the 2 triggers on the back. And somehow they went, you know what? Let's just take away buttons because it's thinking.
Well, it may have been, but they clearly were not.
Yeah.
It seems like they're more concerned about the VMU functionality than they were anything else. And I even have to ask, like, why would you make 2 VMU slots? Why wouldn't you just make the VMU storage capacity bigger? Because it's not that big, especially when you try to use the VMU in the way that Sega was trying to imply to use the VMU. And this, I guess we're having a VMU conversation here, but it's cool because as a fan of the Wii U, because it's like, this is like baby steps all the way to that, which I guess they shared a similar fate. But like, if you're playing Resident Evil, as Van was saying, and you're suffering damage, you don't have to open a menu to see how damaged you are. You can see your status on your VMU as you're playing, which is cool.
That's called a HUD. It's a heads-up display. It's part of the UI of the game.
Not for Resident Evil?
No, but that's what I'm saying is that like that gets done. It's been done. This is that argument of like, oh, well, this is so cool because look, you can see the information down there. You know who else made that argument? Or you know what? Actually, I'm not even going to say this because you're literally the worst person to make this argument against. I was going to say,
I love my Wii U.
The Wii U, for instance.
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, let's do this whole second screen thing. Not everybody really actually utilized it well at all. I even have some qualms with some of the games on like the DS and 3DS because I think that they just took the second screen thing and just did it as a gimmick and it didn't actually add anything useful to a game whatsoever. But I mean, sure, man, I guess it's cool that you can see that on the little VMU, but I don't know. It's a novelty. It's a novelty, right?
Yeah. And the thing is, a lot of these cool ideas on paper, they sound cool, but in actual, I don't think I ever looked at the VMU while playing any game ever the same way. You know how the PS4 has a light bar that if you're low on health, it lights red. I'm not looking at the stupid bar. I'm looking at the screen. So it doesn't really do that much for me. So it was kind of the same concept. I did like that, for example, in Soul Calibur, if you were playing a character, you can see like a little chibi version of that character there. but that did nothing for the actual like experience. It's like, oh, cool, I can see my character.
Didn't they respond to your button presses too?
Yeah, like if you press a button, they do like a little attack animation, and it was cute. But if you're playing a fighting game, you're playing for keeps. You're not looking at a stupid chibi character doing the attacks while someone is like swinging for the fences.
Both of you are no fun. I'm going to say that right now. Neither of you are fun people.
Listen, man, I just find it hard to justify, like I said earlier, just fucking slapping a Tamagotchi onto your controller and being like, this is what we need to design everything around.
It was literally Tamagotchi when you took it out, especially like for Sonic in the Chow Garden.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
it was awesome.
I remember taking that to like school and like feeding my chow or whatever, but
it would last about 1 hour, and then you need to replace it with 2 CR2032 batteries.
And honestly, I still remember the beep of the VMU, since it just gets to a point where you stop caring about like replacing batteries, and it just stays in the controller and powers up every time you power the system.
Yeah, the battery life on the VMU is not the best. I think we all know that. I wish it was better, because it did do some fun things. Like for Power Stone, if you download a little game, there's like a little shmup, and you can get items that way. I think you could do World Warrior training for Street Fighter Alpha 3 on it, much like it did with the Pocket Station for the PlayStation. So it had cool things, and I just think you guys are you don't like having fun. I think that's what it comes down to.
No, I
don't like fun things.
I like when
you don't like cute
things are designed around like solid core functionality, not the patented Nintendo approach of like, oh, let's make some stupid fucking peripheral and then design our entire thing around it and hope that actually works. Like, I at no point, and now I'm veering off into a Nintendo rant, but I just want to say, at no point do I give Nintendo like credit for being like, man, the Wii, what a fucking blockbuster that was, like fucking genius. No, man, they've been throwing shit against the wall for years and hoping that one of their dumb gimmicks sticks, and that one just happened to stick. And like, I am categorically against the idea that you're going to design an entire console around like a gimmick peripheral, and that's kind of like what this did.
I mean, but you're giving the VMU way too much credit, saying that that peripheral was the system was designed around that, because honestly,
no, the controller was.
Oh, the controller.
Well, to its detriment. I'll say this: like if they wanted to make the VMU, they could have skipped out on that. They did not need to do that, and it's clear the reason that Sega, like in terms of the controller design, the reason that controller sucks so much, because as we already said, they had the template with the 3D pad for the Saturn. It was there. It's a copy paste, but all the things they took out in order to make the Dreamcast controller, you can tell, were strictly for VMU functionality. That's the only reason that shit's there.
But how hard will it have been to have 2 more face buttons? I don't feel like the VMU justifies taking them off.
No, I don't think it does either. That was the weird thing. Like,
I don't think just because it had a VMU, they say, you know what, we just can't make this work with more buttons. I think the Dreamcast was just a perfect storm of let's make the most boneheaded decisions and just run with them, because they go like, okay, let's do 4 GPUs and all this crap, and let's also make this portable like mini game memory card thing that people can take on the run and then feed their little like blobs. I don't know. It just feels like that was resources and time that could have been gone to a better part of the development cycle to make this the Dreamcast actually live longer.
See, that's what I was saying. It's like a book that needs an editor. It's like when George Lucas made the prequels and he didn't have anybody around him anymore to tell him that his ideas were trash. That's what happens.
Yeah. Well, he gave it to people who had even worse ideas.
Yeah, well,
debatable. I know some people like the new stuff.
Well, they're wrong, but that's fine.
I like Rogue One. It's great.
Yeah, Rogue One was good.
It's great. I guess that's kind of a segue, and I think this is going to be short. Is there any scenario, or would there be anything that you would do to make sure that the Dreamcast could survive or would have a chance with a relatively similar timeline?
Add 2 more buttons.
How about yourself, Shane? You are the downer. Add 2 more buttons. That would have fixed everything.
I mean, in all honesty, I don't think so. I think everything was working against Sega at this point. Like they were fighting against the dying of the light, but you know, the shadow of the looming PS2, I think, was just too much. Like I don't. In a world where the PS2 didn't exist, sure, yeah, it probably would have been fine, but there was no chance. And I don't see anything outside of vastly changing, altering the timeline and removing like Sony from the equation or anything like that that's really going to make too much of a difference.
I think you make some good points there, and it's not like Sega's woes weren't partially created by the original Sony PlayStation to begin with. It just kicked the Saturn's ass forward and back in most regions. So they were in that position just because Sega couldn't measure up to the PlayStation in many regards. How about yourself, Van?
I feel like the Dreamcast was very rooted in the present. The technology they put there, they were trying to do what the PCs were doing with voodoo cards. They were porting arcade games that were already out. So I feel like it just wasn't visionary enough. It wasn't a future-proof system. If you look how the games look when the Dreamcast came out, let's say Soul Calibur, and then the other extreme, the end, which is Shenmue, pretty much, the leap is not that big if you think about it. They all have this particular aesthetic to them. I always thought the Dreamcast looked like an evolution of what the N64 graphics were. They had this boxy look to them. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
No, I know. Yeah.
But you look at the PS2 when it came out, let's say SXX, Ridge Racer, Tekken Tag Tournament, and then you see the final games of the system. The transition was huge from one to the other. I just feel the Dreamcast was just laser focused on this particular time, this particular technology and everything. And maybe it is because the system died in 2 years. Maybe it didn't reach that next step. But I just feel that the Dreamcast was in this bubble that it didn't really evolve at all during its lifetime.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like what could have saved it. I think a lot of people say if you put a DVD player in the Dreamcast, it would have gotten some legs. I think there's some truth to that, but I think that's not with the knowledge that Sega's financial situation was like utter shit. As we already discussed, like the idea if they had infinite money slapping a DVD drive in there, yeah, it could have worked. But like if you go back to when they started developing the console, which was 97, and DVDs, I think, were out in 97. But they were extremely expensive in 97, of course, much more than they would be in even 2000 with the PlayStation. So if you're Sega and you're looking at it, and I think that's a good criticism, a good critique, is that they were very focused in the present. And if you look at how terribly money and inventory and everything was being managed in the United States, even though that's where they were the most successful, with Europe's like right behind them, they were having problems getting inventory out of their warehouses. And they couldn't sell anything. So they just had all these games that were just sitting around. This was a report from Sega in 1997 that has surfaced recently, is that they were still putting too much credence into the Genesis and its success, even like by 96. And that's insane because they should have focused more on getting the Saturn off the shelf. And that entire way that they handled the Saturn in the United States is pretty much what killed Sega even before the Dreamcast could come out, because as I've said multiple times, like the Saturn did okay in Japan. It's just everywhere else they completely botched it. So you're already in a situation where Sega's already on its last legs. You can't afford a DVD drive in the Dreamcast without taking a huge loss, unless you want to charge $300 for that system minimum when it comes out. I think they may have gotten away with it, possibly. But then when you consider the fact that within less than a year, they had to drop the price, like whatever the equivalent, like 1,000 yen, 10,000 yen in Japan within the first year. Not even the visuals were making up for that. So they would need to have a more powerful processor, which, of course, then they couldn't do. I think some things they could have done to maybe make it last a little bit longer, at the very least, considering their financial situation, is something I think it was Shane or Van, one of you two said earlier, like, go talk to the developers. Like, who are your most important developers? EA was not with them. And by this point, EA started being a huge developer. They started to really start to make their market presence being felt. And without them, I don't think EA released a single game for the Dreamcast. It took them a long time to get to the Saturn.
Now that you're talking about it, I just realized the third-party support just wasn't there.
Right.
I can't think of games by... Did they even release any Square games for the Dreamcast at all?
Well, Sega has never gotten a Square game.
Right. So I think the fact that it didn't have a lot of the third-party developers on board. Also, apart from fighting games, it was very lacking in sequels. And I think sequels are a huge part of the success of a new console. Seeing the next evolution of a series you that's beloved, that is one of the big drives to get a new console in itself. So apart from that Dreamcast bubble of Dreamcast games and fighting games and all that, there wasn't much to look forward to.
I also think they needed to make more console-centric experiences. I think if Sega invested more money, and they invested a ton of money into Shenmue, but if they had focused getting that more streamlined, I think it could have done a lot better. Because I'm looking at its launch lineup right now. How many of these games are arcade games? And I've already said that's the reason why so many people today in the retro gaming scene, like around our age, love the Dreamcast, is because it does remind you of a time when, like, the arcades. Again, I mean, that's not where people were going to get their gaming experiences at this time. Like, the taste for arcade games, as much as people do love, like, once they sit down and actually play them, they love them. Like, Hydro Thunder is a launch game for the Sega Dreamcast. Hydro Thunder for the Dreamcast is a really fun game. You're not buying a console for Hydro Thunder.
Also, the nature of the arcade game is literally you pick it up, you play it, you put it down, you don't think about it.
Yeah.
It's not like an RPG that, okay, I left here, I have to pick it up, kind of keep going. So overall, the fact that there was such a big focus in arcade games and fighting games made the console just very, like, sporadic, momentaneous, like, gameplay sessions that you just done, and it just didn't have that hook to just keep bringing you back to the same game and just kind of keep going. Because almost all of those games, you can experience everything the game has to offer in 45 minutes, 1 hour.
Yeah. Or, like, you just either that or you get really, really good at it and you play it competitively and you start playing for scores, which, again, didn't matter by this point. I think it could have benefited if they tried to get, like, Code Veronica as a launch game. I think that would have been huge, because that is a big sequel and that was a big game. But, like, that didn't happen. And I think, like, just the knowledge of the PS2 coming out, and Shane said it best. I don't think there's no way to make the Dreamcast successful without Sony catastrophically failing and getting the PlayStation 2 out. That's pretty much the only answer. Like, sabotaging Sony. Dude, I think people forget how much people wanted to watch DVDs. I don't think people comprehend that. I don't.
No, I mean, no, that's a good point, especially at that time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I was watching DVDs like up until, like, the 2010s. I would go to the store every day and, like, what new movie came out? I'm excited to watch it. Like, rentals at Blockbuster, they were having DVDs. And all of a sudden you get a video game console and a DVD player with the PS2.
Yeah, man. Now that you're talking about this, like, I had the PS1, the PS2 right when I started college, and there was a Suncoast in my local mall, and I will buy DVDs like weekly over there. It was a whole thing, especially since I was huge into anime, and I grew up watching anime. I will rent from a comic book store that it was a fan sub that was recorded from a VHS that was recorded from a VHS like and basically it was just static, nice. And you will get that tracking message like on the top of the screen. So it was basically a brand new exciting medium that did everything better than the previous one. And also, you got the fact that the PS1 was so huge. People were really looking forward to continuing that experience. And since the Saturn was such a massive flop overall, I think a lot of people didn't have faith in Sega at that point, and they kind of got proven right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's time to start getting towards the end here, but before we do, let's just list off what we consider our top 3 games for the console. Shane, we all know you love Crazy Taxi. Final Fantasy IX fans know this very well. I'm going to assume that's on your list, but what might your other 2 games be if you have them?
Oh, I would say, yeah, my 3 would probably be Crazy Taxi, Skies of Arcadia for sure. I want to say House of the Dead 2, but we North Americans didn't get the opportunity to use Sega light guns. So
yes, we did.
Not according to what I'm
not first party.
Yeah. So I you know what? I'm going to say, because they both require a peripheral, I'm going to say it's a toss up between that or Typing of the Dead, because I friggin' love Typing of the Dead.
Oh, I got the keyboard for that. It was so amazing. I love Typing of the Dead. That is such a good game, man. Especially for the Dreamcast. That keyboard is clutch. That's a phenomenal keyboard. That's good. That's some good picks. Yeah, I'm going to say Skies of Arcadia is up there. This is no particular order. So Skies of Arcadia, Phantasy Star Online, and I'm going to say Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Those are my top 3 right there. And Phantasy Star Online is because like there's no way to replicate that. So I don't go and try and play it unless you have like your own private server. But again, it's like there's no way to replicate the experience that was there back when I was playing it, because now you're just going to get major Phantasy Star Online nerds. You can still play it. It has an offline mode. It's nowhere near as fun as the original. And you can't get the 2001 experience. It's not possible. How about yourself, Van?
I'll have to go with Soul Calibur, Resident Evil Code Veronica, and Space Channel 5.
Nice. Space Channel 5 is great.
I'm not even being ironic. I love that game. I love the vibe. I love the music. Good. It's just such a fun experience that it's a game that just kind of like, I go back to the soundtrack every so often because it was just groovy, man.
That's. Did you play Shenmue 2, by the way?
Not really. I do remember we had a copy that we were playing. You know, the game chart basically was part of the reason the Dreamcast died, because playing copies of games were so easy. But the thing is, I lived with my brother, and we had a kind of thing that if he played a game, usually I wouldn't play it because I was just kind of sitting in the background while he played a game. So he did play it, but I did see a lot of it, and I think it did improve a little on the original formula, but it was kind of more of a direct continuation, pretty much more of the same.
Yeah, released in Europe and never in the United States.
That's why we had a copy of the PAL version, because that's all. It was either that or the Japanese one, which is also kind of baffling since you already translated the whole game. Why did you just release it in? I don't know.
Yeah, it's the most popular region, and they didn't release it.
Yeah, I think when they decided to pull the plug, they went like scorched earth. They're like, we are done.
Yeah, same with Space Channel 5 too, and Rez. It's very, very strange decision making they made at the end. Yeah, we didn't really get into that, but not really much of a reason to, because those games weren't really wildly successful there at the end. I mean, they're important, but yeah, they and a lot of them got ported later. But well, those are our top 3 games. There's a lot, of course, that we missed. We're never going to be able to cover all aspects of a console. If you want to hear us do a second part of this, you can just let us know in the comments, let us know in our Discord, let us know, all over social media. We're not going to get everything, but I think we covered quite a bit of this. But now it is time, speaking about comments that we get on our Discord from our wonderful patrons. Now it is time to go to our Patreon notifications. So if you are a patron and you're in our Discord, just head on over to that section that is called Patreon notifications, and just comment on whatever game we have coming up next, and you can get right at it. And we are going to start out with Raging Demon, the Super Scrub, who is from the Command List podcast. That's with a K. And Demon says, The Dreamcast is the oft-forgotten first console of the 6th generation. Yes, it is, Demon. This is a factual statement, much like acceleration due to gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared. It had a horrible controller, but superb fighting games. Chris knows what they are, so yeah. Crazy Taxi. That's not a fighter. Demon, interesting way to close that out. I like your comments. Shane?
All right, next up, we have the one and only Disc Chimera, also known as Game Over Hell over on the YouTube. Go subscribe there if you haven't done that already. And Disc Chimera says, never saw a Dreamcast in person or knew anyone who owned one. Hey, me too. Now that I'm a lot more knowledgeable about it, it feels incredibly tragic how a system with such a ridiculously solid launch year library ended being the last of Sega's hardware plans. Makes me feel bad for not being one of the buyers. Arguably the system that encouraged the most out of Sega's first-party developers' creativity. The world would have been a better place to live if instead of Xbox Series X, we had the Sega Dreamcast 3 or something. You know I'm right. Thank you, Disc Chimera.
If only. Oh well.
Yes, we got Soha, and Soha says, it's totally fine to be a Dreamcast in Brazil. Nothing bad ever happens to Dreamcast in Brazil. Huh. That's
What happens to Dreamcasts in Brazil?
You don't want to know.
I am kind of wondering, but I think it has to do with the whole it's thinking thing. You don't want to be thinking down there.
It'll happen to X and it'll happen to you too.
All right. We're moving on to Adam from the Good, the Bad, and the Backlog podcast. And Adam says, it's okay. All right.
Yeah.
Maximum effort. Thanks, Adam. All right. Well, moving right along, we have Ray, the bad game guy, who says, I think the Dreamcast proved how warped my tastes were in games when I told everyone that the two games I was most excited for the console were Shenmue and Space Channel 5.
Hell yeah.
You found your new best friend there, Vanfernal.
Kindred spirits.
Space Channel 5 had Space Michael. It literally had Michael Jackson in it.
Yes, it did.
Actually, a bunch of Dreamcast games had Michael Jackson, apparently.
He likes Sega.
All right, so now we got Omi. And Omi says, Sega Dreamcast set the standard for the contemporary game console design, using PC-related hardware for its graphics, as well as having online play built in as a feature. The DC also had some other firsts, such as better-than-arcade quality games like Soul Calibur, which was using souped-up PS1 hardware in the arcade cabinet. My own thoughts on the console was that it excelled in fighting games, but had controllers poorly suited to doing so. Yes, indeed. They also totally missed the boat on having dual analogs, but by the time they really mattered, I guess the system was already dead. I recall the mere mention of the imminent PS2 launch killed any momentum the DC had in the market. Pour one out for the short-lived legend. Yes, that I agree with pretty much every statement he made.
Oh, absolutely. Same. All right, next is Nomad from the Retro Wildlands podcast. Go check them out. And Nomad says, I always felt lucky to be able to have a Dreamcast when I was a kid. My stepdad got one on sale, but we never got a lot of games for it. The ones we did were memorable, though. Crazy Taxi, Resident Evil, Code Veronica, House of the Dead 2. But I'll always remember the Dreamcast for Skies of Arcadia, the pirate RPG in the sky. The Dreamcast will always be that console I wish I had more time with. I remember it fondly, like an old friend. Thank you, Nomad.
All right. Moving on next, we have Matt, aka Stormageddon, from the Fun and Games and Reignite podcasts, who says, basically going to share the same thing I said for Still Loading's episode on this same topic because I don't know which episode will air first. It's a funny thing. The Dreamcast is one of the few consoles that I have never owned at any point. My best friend did, though, but have a ton of fond memories of it. Games like Crazy Taxi and NFL Blitz 2000 were a blast to play with my bestie. Games like Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 are near and dear to my heart, though I wouldn't really get to play them till the GameCube ports. Also, the VMU to this day is one of the coolest things, and it bums me out that no one has tried something like it since. You're gonna hate all my commentary on that. All right. Hey, thank you, Matt.
We're kindred spirits, Matt. I'm right there with you. Wii U for life.
Useless peripherals. Yay.
Not useless if you love them. Right. Next is Alt. And Alt says, bring back Power Stone. Never played or held one. Good news, Alt. They are. You must have made that comment prior to that announcement.
But I hated to
you willed it.
I hate to break it to you, Alt, but Power Stones aren't real, so yeah, there's no way to actually hold one or play with one. So I'm sorry.
I can show you some Power Stones. I can hold them.
All right, we got Storm Beagle Sam from Retrotopia Podcast and says, I never really got to see or play a Dreamcast, but I wish I had. Sounds like there are some gems on that bad boy. Yes, indeed.
All right, next up we have Tony G, the Wolf Man, who says the Dreamcast is the stuff childhood memories are made of for me. Power Stone, Dynamite Cop, Shenmue, Berserk, and Marvel vs. Capcom were all titles that I played relentlessly as a kid. It had a short but memorable life, like a child who dies from too many bee stings and then some little girl's trying to put his glasses on, but since he's dead, he doesn't care. Ah, memories. Well, all right. That is a reference.
Yeah.
All right.
Next is Ozzy. And Ozzy says, the Dreamcast was the first console I could identify as a next generation console. I remember seeing the players in NFL 2K, phenomenal game, and thinking about how crisp it all looked. Unfortunately, I was still invested in the PS1 at the time, so it took a little longer for me to get to a Dreamcast. Luckily, 2 years later, I got a PS2, and since that was backwards compatible, I managed to convince a friend to trade me his Dreamcast with all his games for my PS1. I still don't know how I managed to make this happen, but I am sure it started me on my journey in hunting for collecting opportunities. The system itself lived up to expectations, with games like Shenmue, Crazy Taxi, and Jet Grind Radio giving me many hours of enjoyment. It was also my gateway into Genesis classics such as Streets of Rage and Golden Axe through the Smash Pack collection. So yeah, it is a pretty meaningful console for me and one that shined very brightly in its very short lifespan. Keep on dreaming, sweet prince. Thank you, Ozzy.
Next, we got the Emperor who says, Dreamcast had so much potential. What a waste how Sega squandered it. You know, the thing is, I feel like Sega was actually trying at this point.
Yeah, they ran out on a gas. It wasn't squandered. They did the best they could. I don't think it was squandered. It was just they couldn't do anything else.
That's the sad part. Like you can tell they were trying everything to make this work, but it was doomed from the get-go.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have JC, who says the Sega Dreamcast really feels like it was a system ahead of its time. Today, it might not impress as much, but being able to play games online back then felt like the future. And this was carried out to the software, despite its flaws. Titles like Shenmue gave the world a glimpse of how open worlds could be prior to the launch of GTA 3, and games like Metropolis Street Racer also did a great deal to shake up the racing genre. And don't even get me started on Soul Calibur, plus the quality Capcom and SNK fighting titles. It really is a shame that Sega had mismanaged the Saturn and the Dreamcast, which led to hesitations from the buying public. Oh, there was also a small thing called the PlayStation 2 that pissed all over the Dreamcast. Still, it lives on to this day with numerous ports and releases, Atomic Wave, anyone? And this fills my cold, dead heart with glee. Thank you, JC.
Thank you, JC. And you know what? Still great on Instagram. I don't know how to say his last name correctly. It's like J Chazes, but it's Portuguese. So I said that entirely incorrectly. But go check out his Instagram account for his great art. All right. Moving on to Keith, who is still part of, I think, the occasionally relevant, somewhat living version of the Main Quest podcast. And Keith says, I wish I got to spend more time with the Dreamcast while it was alive, so it knew how much I actually appreciated it. Aw. I didn't have a lot of games for the Dreamcast, It had a murderer's row of sports games that I would have loved to play 3 or 4 years prior to the console launching, but I was too busy playing the PS2 and eventually forced EB Games to take it off my hands for an Xbox and a GameCube. Fortunately, in 2021, I found a cheap Dreamcast and desecrated its corpse by putting a mode in it, and now I finally have the childhood I missed. Thank you, Keith. I also have a mode, and that's how I play all my games on the Dreamcast now, too.
And finally, we got Ash Event. And he says the first Dreamcast I saw was when stationed overseas in Korea, but had a pre-order in for the PS2 already. It was such a great console and what all of us played together in the day room. I was very impressed by a young staff sergeant getting a divorce. Yeah, 2 consoles was not gonna happen. Lol. Luckily, that's what retro collecting is for. I love the Dreamcast now that I have a few and some wonderful titles in the library. P.S. As for the online thing, great you didn't have to add some chunk on the back like the PS2. Lol.
Thanks, Ash Event. Appreciate it. Were you in the military when the Dreamcast came out, or was that a little before your time?
I was 17, so no, that was way before my time.
Okay, so that's a lot of comments from our patrons. Thank you, patrons. We read as many as we can until we get too many, but we're still right there. That's a lot, and a lot of love for the Dreamcast, apparently, which is fantastic, as I love it too. But now we're going to shift gears a little bit. Whether or not we love it doesn't mean that we think it holds up today. And as is tradition, myself and Shane will go first before giving our guest the final word. So, Shane, does the Dreamcast hold up today?
Ooh, I don't even know how to answer that. Like, I think there are a lot of Dreamcast exclusive titles that are worth checking out. It is, well, I guess technically it was, I suppose, the start of the 6th generation, according to some, who is apparently that's an objective fact. I don't know. I'm not going to debate that. I don't have a dog in that fight, but yeah, I mean, I think so. I think there's a lot there that's worth checking out. Even having an actual Dreamcast, I still haven't really taken the time, honestly, to check out a lot more of its library, which is fairly expansive. I mean, you can go online and look and see, like, you know, top 50 lists of Dreamcast games. So I think there's plenty meat there to kind of dig into. So I think so. I mean, the controller kind of sucks balls, so that doesn't help. But I guess if you can get past that, right, then there's definitely some good experiences to be had there that in a lot of cases you may not be able to find anywhere else. I mean, there have been a lot of ports of things, but I think there are some that are probably still kind of beholden to that system. So it's going to be the only way for now that you'll be able to actually experience those, unless you want to do some sailing of some high seas and doing that. But even then, the Dreamcast emulation can kind of be kind of hitchy sometimes. So yeah, I think so. I think if you can find one for a relatively inexpensive price, I think it's probably worth it. So yeah, I think it holds up.
All right. I'm actually going to probably go against the grain here, Shane. And I can appreciate everything you said as someone who loves the Dreamcast and loves having a Dreamcast and loves playing games on his Dreamcast. I have said, and this goes back to a comment I wrote in for Region Free Gamers a long time ago. I think it's be like 3 or 4 years ago now, probably almost 5. But they asked what people thought of the Dreamcast. And I said this then, and I stand by it, that it is the worst console of its generation. And that's not saying it's a bad console. I mean, when I say the worst console, I mean major console. I'm not talking about some like piddly shit that no one's ever heard of that only got released in Taiwan or something. I'm talking about like worldwide international console. It's the worst one. And I mean, that's also a testament of how good that generation was, because again, I love the system. I think it has a wealth of good games, particularly fighting games. And as Keith said, it has some great sports games. But I think it sits in a place kind of where the Wii U does. Does it? I mean, I'm kind of turning my back on the Wii U. I can't even keep up the masquerade of someone who like just unashamedly loves the Wii U. All of its best games found a home somewhere else. And when they are degraded, they're not degraded enough to the point where you do have to run out and buy a Dreamcast in order to play it. And the games that didn't get ported immediately after into the next generation, whether it be Xbox, GameCube, or PlayStation 2, or like sequels that came out that on the system that kind of, I don't want to say eradicated the reason to play the previous one, but were enough of an improvement with its sequels that you didn't necessarily have to go buy a Dreamcast for the original. Like, I think Soul Calibur is an amazing game. I think it's phenomenal. But a lot of people would be like, why should I go play that when I have Soul Calibur 2 and I can play as Link? And that's a completely understandable position. Why do you need to go get a Dreamcast and play NFL 2K1 when you can play 2K4 and 2K5 on your PS2? Understandable. Jet Set Radio. Like, why play that when you have Jet Set Radio Future on your Xbox? Yeah, there's a ton of reasons to go back and play the Dreamcast, but a lot of those reasons found homes moving forward. Skies of Arcadia Legends on the GameCube, Phantasy Star Online on the GameCube. So it makes it hard to say if you're going to go back and collect for a system. Like, there's only one system that you can get from this generation. Okay, first option is PS2. Okay, then what? Probably GameCube because the unique experiences there. And then maybe Xbox. But like, if you really think about it, it's really hard to justify going out of your way to get a Dreamcast other than nostalgia, especially with how bad that controller is. That controller is just, it's wretched. It's fucking wretched. And that's part of the experience with the Dreamcast. Still looks good on a VGA, and I can attest to that. But actually, and getting VGA cables is easier now. And so again, do I love playing my Dreamcast? Yes. But I know that I am an oddity in this space. I know that I'm a hyper retro game lover. And if you're more of a casual one, which I think is the majority of retro gamers, then it's hard for me to say that it's held up. It doesn't look that much worse than the other ones, but it's going to be it's going to hold up if you have nostalgia for it, for sure. But if you don't, I'm surprised. This is why I'm surprised you said yes. If you don't, you can find the best experiences for the system on a PS2 or GameCube. So I'm going to have to regretfully say no, it doesn't. And I love it. I hate saying that. But Vanfernal, how about yourself?
I think I mirror a lot of what you're saying. The thing is, again, I did love the Dreamcast. I bought it with my own money. I loved it. I was huge into fighting games back in the day. But the problem is, if you're not into arcade games or fighting games, there is not that much here. Yeah, you have your Skies of Arcadia and your Grandia 2 and all that, but every other retro console I can think of dating back to the NES, I can say, okay, you got your shooters, you got your RPGs, you got like this, you got that. There's a little bit of everything. I feel that the Dreamcast library was so centered on arcades and fighting games, which were arcade games also, that if you're not into that pick up and play kind of experience and you want something deeper, definitely this is not the system for you. Also, I did go back to Sonic Adventure fairly recently. Code Veronica, I replayed it on my stream. I also played Shenmue when the HD version came out, and I honestly felt like none of those games held up, which were some of the biggest games in the system. And if you notice, I did say that Code Veronica is my second favorite game on the system. So I will actually have to concur that it just doesn't hold up. Like, if you are have nostalgia for the times of the arcades and late 90s and that kind of stuff, you might find something. But if you say, I'm gonna collect one retro system, one retro console because of the library and all it has to offer, this is definitely in the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
And again, this is very painful for me to say, because like I would love to say, yeah, the Dreamcast was amazing. You had to be there, like just go out there and buy some Dreamcast games. But honestly, it is what it is. I feel that its life was cut too short to just have that expansive library that just had all this variety to it. It just didn't happen.
Yeah, and that's us being as objective as possible. I think subjectively we would say, yeah, absolutely. But I think when you step back and you take that bird's eye view and you're like, what are the best games for the system? And you can play them other places. What's the point of really getting that system? it makes it extremely difficult.
Yeah, my mind's telling me no.
I am flabbergasted that I am the only one out of the three of us that said yes. But you know what? I feel well. Yeah, no, I know what I know what you're about
nostalgia.
to say. Yeah, exactly. But you know what? You know what? I feel good about that decision because I feel like it balances things out. You know, the two of you who have a lot of fondness for the system, being a bit more objective, begrudgingly said no. I'll throw my yes into the ring. You know, soften the blow a little bit. There you go.
But you know, that actually makes me a little hopeful that because I really hope that we are wrong. We having a lot of nostalgia for the system. We say, wow, we look at it and maybe we're being too harsh, and you have way less experience to it. And you said, yeah, it's cool. It's cool. It holds up. And I really hope that that sentiment is mirrored by most people out there. I really do.
Same. Well, that does bring us to the end of this episode. Vanfernal, thank you so much for stopping by the show. It was great having you on here. I really do appreciate it. I'm like I already said at the beginning of the episode, I'm a big fan of Super Garbage Day. You and B. Ross kill it. I'm also a big fan of your stream, but you know what? It's not necessarily my job to plug all your shows as much as I do love them. I think the best person to explain that would be the person who's on them. So Vanfernal, where can we find you on the internet? How can people find your content?
So I am the co-host of the Super Garbage Day podcast. It is our retro game podcast. And what we do is we play games that are 20 years or older, and then we just talk about them. And I also have a retro stream on YouTube under Vanfernal. Basically, if you can find me anywhere under Vanfernal, but pretty much I focus on retro games. Nostalgia is a big thing for me. It kind of, it takes you to some simpler times in life and gives you that fuzzy feeling, you know? So yeah, Super Garbage Day podcast. We had a lot of fun over there, so check it out.
Awesome. And thank you. Definitely go check them out. And once again, appreciate you stopping by because you came by on short notice. So it was originally. So it's great that you came out here.
Thank you for inviting me. And also, I know I love the Dreamcast. I never actually took the time to just analyze the Dreamcast like in depth, and I kind of feel bad about the whole thing now because it's like maybe I just repressed how like that memory of how tragic this whole thing was, because now that we reopened that wound, I'm like, wow, it just almost killed Sega, and like, it killed one of its like CEOs and stuff, and yeah. It was, let's just say, I have a lot of emotions right now attached to it, but it was a good trip down memory lane.
Definitely. All right, Shane. So I guess that's our cue to start making our spiel and wrapping things up. So what you got for us?
Oh, so much. All right. Well, if this happens to be the first time that you've joined us on the show, well, hi, hello, welcome. We hope you enjoyed your stay. And if you did, and you enjoyed it enough to go and seek out some more content, there is plenty for you. Not only do we have nearing 300 entries in the main show feed, I think at this point, but also we have a whole separate bevy of content over on our Patreon. So if you're voracious, you can't get enough of the content machine that is mostly Chris, but the Retro Hangover podcast, then you can go and check out the Patreon as well as some other things. We got a whole bunch of other stuff there, but the easiest way to do that probably is to just go to our link tree, because we make it easy for you. It's all there. We've centralized, we've streamlined. So all you got to do is go to linktr.ee/Retro Hangover and click on that Patreon button. And for as little as $1 a month, you too can get access to a whole bunch of extra content, as well as the patron exclusive Discord channel in our otherwise publicly available Discord. So even if you don't become a patron, and we don't say that you have to at all, you can still jump into the Discord and join in on the fun. We have conversations going daily over there. It is a hip and happening place. So if you want to get in on that action, then you can check that out through the link tree as well. We also have a merch store and our socials. And now we have our YouTube and our Twitch channels synced. We are in lockstep. We're locked in, as the kids say these days. In that, when we stream, and that's something that Chris is going to give you a little bit more info here on in just a second, you can see it in either place. Or if you just want to get real sweaty about it, you could get both. You know, you got a dual monitor setup. Put us on both. Just kill your fucking bandwidth. You know, just go nuts. Bring up YouTube and Twitch at the same time. You know, be the hero that we don't deserve. So Chris, if they decide that they want to check that out, where and when does that happen?
Well, just go to our streams at 9 p.m. Eastern time on Sundays, and you can find us there. I normally was give the Twitch link, but I don't know our YouTube one. So just, find it at our link tree. So if you head to Twitch or YouTube on Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern time, you'll find us streaming something. And this is the part where I say something completely foul and out of the ordinary. So I just want to say, if you swing by our streams, let me know what kind of porn you watch. We can all talk about it, have a good time. We all masturbate. We all know it happens. You know, whether you're double clicking your mouse or stroking your sausage. I want to know what makes those gears. Well, I don't want to know, but if you want to let us know, this is probably, I really don't want to know, but you can let us know. I'm curious, but this is why I say this, because sometimes, some of you do let me know. I've heard what buttholes taste like, because, 2 or 3 of you come by our chat after I say these things and let us know, because you make it to the end. But I just want you to know that Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern time, you can find all that information and more at either Twitch or YouTube. And we hope to see you there, hopefully saying something in response. Well, I actually know, I hope. I don't know why I did that. Back to you, Shane.
One of these days, Chris is going to get us in actual legal trouble, and it's going to be glorious. But until that time, we are going to continue to just run rampant, just absolutely amok. So while we're doing that, until next time,
play with your, is it a red or orange swirl joysticks?
Burnt sienna.
Bye, everybody.
Shane here with a quick message. The one rule Chris and I have always gone by regarding advertisements is this: it has to be something we use and can personally vouch for. If you know me, you know I love coffee, and Bones Coffee Company has been my go-to for home brewing for quite some time now. Their small batch beans come in an impressive variety of flavors, like Mint Invaders from Chocolate Space, or Electric Unicorn, which I swear tastes exactly like Fruity Pebbles. And the best part? No added sugar or calories involved, just natural flavors infused right into the beans themselves. Build your own sample pack of 5 4-ounce bags to find out which flavors speak to you, or jump in head first with full 12-ounce bags. They've even got K-Cups. Step up your homebrew game with Bones Coffee by visiting bit.ly/RHPBones. That's bit.ly/RHPBONES.